Sofia Delgado's story did not begin with her escape, nor with the cold concrete walls that confined her for nearly 8 years. It began in Tijuana, Mexico, in 1987, during a time when the city was transforming from a border town into a battleground for competing drug cartels. Born into poverty, Sofia learned early that survival required more than hope. It demanded cunning, adaptability, and a willingness to cross lines others feared to approach. Her father disappeared when she was 7. Some said he had been killed over a gambling debt. Others whispered he had fled to the United States, abandoning his family for a fresh start. Sofia's mother never spoke of him. Instead, she worked 3 jobs, cleaning houses during the day, washing dishes at a restaurant in the evening, and taking in laundry at night. Despite her efforts, money was scarce. There were weeks when dinner consisted of nothing more than beans and tortillas, stretched thin to feed Sofia and her 2 younger brothers. School became Sofia's refuge. She excelled in her studies, particularly in mathematics and English. Her teachers recognized her potential and encouraged her to pursue higher education. By the age of 15, she spoke fluent English with almost no accent, a skill that would later prove invaluable. She dreamed of becoming an accountant, of working in an air-conditioned office far from the dusty streets of Tijuana. But dreams required money, and money was something her family did not have. At 16, Sofia took a job at a call center that serviced American companies. She worked evening shifts, answering complaints from frustrated customers in California and Texas. The pay was modest, but it helped. She gave most of her earnings to her mother, keeping only enough for bus fare and an occasional meal. Her brothers looked up to her, seeing in her determination a path out of the cycle that had trapped their family for generations. Everything changed when Sofia turned 18. A friend from work invited her to a party at a nightclub in the Zona Norte, an area known for its vibrant nightlife and less savory connections. Sofia hesitated. She was not the party type, but her friend insisted, promising it would be fun, a chance to forget their struggles for one night. Sofia agreed, unaware that this single decision would alter the trajectory of her life forever. The club was loud, packed with people dancing under flashing lights. Sofia felt out of place among the glamorous women in designer dresses and men in expensive suits. She was about to leave when a man approached her. His name was Eduardo Morales, and he was unlike anyone she had ever met. He was older, perhaps 35, with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He bought her a drink, asked about her life, and listened intently as she spoke. For the first time, someone seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, her dreams. Eduardo was charming, generous, and connected. He owned several businesses, or so he claimed, import-export ventures that took him across the border regularly. He drove a black Mercedes, wore a Rolex, and tipped waiters with $100 bills. Sofia was captivated. Within weeks, they were dating. Within months, she had moved into his apartment, a spacious unit overlooking the city, a far cry from the cramped house she shared with her family. Eduardo introduced Sofia to a world she had only seen in movies. Expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Cabo San Lucas, shopping sprees in San Diego. He bought her clothes, jewelry, and paid for her mother's medical bills when she fell ill. In return, he asked only that she trust him and not ask too many questions about his work. Sofia, blinded by the lifestyle and the affection he showed her, agreed without hesitation. It took nearly a year before Sofia understood the true nature of Eduardo's business. He was not an importer of legal goods. He was a mid-level operator for the Sinaloa cartel, responsible for coordinating drug shipments from Tijuana into Southern California. The realization came gradually, through overheard phone conversations, late-night meetings with dangerous-looking men, and the occasional duffel bag filled with cash left casually on the dining table. By the time Sofia fully grasped what Eduardo was involved in, she was already too deep to walk away. Eduardo needed someone he could trust, someone who could move across the border without raising suspicion. Sofia fit the profile perfectly. She was intelligent, beautiful, and had an American work visa that allowed her to cross legally. He asked her to make a delivery, a small package to an address in San Diego. He assured her it was safe, that she would be paid well, and that this would be a one-time favor. Sophia knew she should refuse, but the money he offered was more than she made in 3 months at the call center. She agreed. That first delivery went smoothly. Sophia crossed the border at San Isidro, drove to the address, handed over the package, and returned. She received $5,000 in cash. It felt surreal, almost too easy. Eduardo praised her, told her she was a natural, and within weeks asked her to make another delivery, then another. Each time the payments increased. Each time Sophia told herself it would be the last. But the money was addictive, and so was the sense of importance she felt being part of Eduardo's operation. By 2009, Sophia had made dozens of runs across the border. She had moved beyond simple deliveries and now coordinated logistics, communicating with suppliers, arranging transportation, and ensuring shipments reached their destinations. She had an apartment in Chula Vista, California, and split her time between there and Tijuana. Her family believed she was working for an international shipping company. They had no idea their daughter was deeply embedded in a criminal enterprise. It was during this period that Sophia met Daniel Crawford, a corrections officer at the Federal Correctional Institution in San Diego. Their meeting was not accidental. Eduardo had instructed Sophia to cultivate relationships with individuals who could provide insider information, people within law enforcement, customs, or the prison system. Daniel was a target of opportunity. He was 38, divorced, struggling with debt from his failed marriage, and feeling undervalued in his job. Sophia encountered him at a sports bar near the prison facility. She struck up a conversation, seemingly by chance, and within weeks, they were seeing each other regularly. Daniel was lonely, vulnerable, and eager for companionship. Sophia provided that, along with subtle financial incentives, gifts that seemed thoughtful but were carefully calculated. Their relationship progressed quickly. Daniel spoke openly about his work, the inner workings of the prison system, security protocols, and transfer schedules. He had no idea he was being manipulated. To him, Sophia was an escape from his mundane and frustrating life. To her, he was a resource, a means to an end. When they married in a small ceremony in Las Vegas in 2010, Daniel believed he had found happiness. Sophia saw it as securing legal residency and deeper access to information that could benefit Eduardo's organization. For 2 years, the arrangement worked flawlessly. Sophia continued her role in the drug trade while maintaining the facade of a devoted wife. She passed information to Eduardo, who used it to stay ahead of law enforcement operations. But federal investigators had been building a case for years, and in 2012, their patience paid off. A coordinated operation across 3 states led to the arrest of over 40 individuals connected to the Sinaloa cartel's Southern California network. Sofia Delgado was among them. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Wiretaps captured her coordinating shipments. Financial records showed large sums of money moving through accounts in her name. Cooperating witnesses testified to her central role in the operation. She was charged with conspiracy to distribute narcotics, money laundering, and racketeering. Her trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution painted her as a calculating operator who had used her intelligence and charm to facilitate the flow of drugs into American communities. The defense argued she had been coerced and manipulated by Eduardo, but the jury did not believe it. In December 2012, Sofia Delgado was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, during sentencing, noted the severity of her crimes and the harm caused to countless individuals and families. Sophia showed little emotion as the sentence was read. She was transferred to the Federal Correctional Institution in Victorville, California, a high-security facility in the Mojave Desert. There, surrounded by barbed wire and constant surveillance, she would spend the next years of her life. Daniel Crawford filed for divorce immediately after her conviction. The revelation of how she had used him left him devastated and humiliated. He testified against her during the trial, providing details about how she had manipulated him into sharing confidential information. The betrayal was mutual, but for Daniel, it was a wound that never fully healed. He relocated to Phoenix, Arizona, changed his name, and attempted to rebuild his life away from the scandal. He remarried, started a small security consulting business, and tried to move forward. But the past, as it often does, would return to haunt him. Prison did not break Sofia Delgado. Instead, it sharpened her. Within the concrete walls of FCI Victorville, she learned to navigate a world governed by unwritten rules, hierarchies, and survival instincts. The facility housed over 1,000 women, many serving lengthy sentences for violent crimes, drug offenses, and white-collar fraud. It was a microcosm of desperation, where alliances formed quickly, and trust was a rare commodity. Sofia adapted within weeks. She observed everything: the power dynamics among inmates, the guards who were strict versus those who were lenient, the daily routines that revealed vulnerabilities in the system. She worked in the prison library, a quiet position that granted her access to legal resources and relative privacy. There, she spent hours reading case law, searching for any angle that might lead to an appeal or sentence reduction. But deep down, Sofia knew the legal system had closed its doors on her. If she wanted freedom, she would have to take it herself. The idea of escape germinated slowly. At first, it seemed absurd, the fantasy of a desperate woman clinging to impossible hope. But as months turned into years, Sofia began to see cracks in the fortress. Every system, no matter how secure, had weaknesses. Every institution relied on people, and people could be influenced, manipulated, bought. Sofia had spent her entire adult life reading people, identifying their vulnerabilities and exploiting them. Prison would be no different. Her first recruit was Officer Lisa Martinez, a corrections officer in her early 30s, who had worked at Victorville for 4 years. Lisa was competent, professional, but struggling financially. She was a single mother raising 2 young daughters on a government salary that barely covered rent, childcare, and groceries. Sofia noticed the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she sometimes skipped lunch to save money, the worn shoes she wore day after day. Vulnerability had a face, and Sofia recognized it immediately. Their initial conversations were harmless. Sofia asked about Lisa's daughters, showed genuine interest in their schoolwork and activities. She offered advice, shared stories, and gradually built trust. 6 months passed before Sofia made her first request, something small and seemingly innocent. She asked Lisa to bring her a specific over-the-counter medication that was not available in the commissary, claiming it helped with chronic headaches. Lisa hesitated but eventually agreed. It was a minor protocol violation, but it felt insignificant. Yet that single act was the crack Sofia needed. Over the following months, the requests escalated gradually. A contraband cell phone smuggled in hidden within a shipment of library books. Cash payments deposited into an account under Lisa's mother's name, untraceable to the officer herself. Sofia was careful never to push too hard, never to make Lisa feel trapped. Instead, she framed each request as a partnership, a way to improve both their situations. By the time Lisa realized how deeply involved she was, walking away would mean exposing her own complicity. She was caught in a web she had helped weave. The cell phone changed everything. It gave Sofia access to the outside world in ways that fundamentally altered her capabilities. She could coordinate with contacts in Los Angeles, San Diego, and even back in Tijuana. She could research Daniel Crawford, tracking his movements through social media posts and public records. She discovered he had remarried and was living in Scottsdale, Arizona, where he ran a small security consulting firm. He had 2 stepdaughters and appeared to have built a comfortable, quiet life, far from the chaos of his past. Sofia studied his routines, his business schedule, his favorite restaurants. She learned everything she could, preparing for the day she would be free to act. Escape required external coordination. Sofia contacted former associates from the cartel, individuals who had evaded prosecution and still operated in the shadows. She called in old favors, promised future compensation for their help. The plan they developed was bold but feasible. It required precise timing, multiple moving parts, and a willingness to accept significant risk. But Sofia had nothing to lose and everything to gain. The escape would happen during a medical transfer. Sofia began preparing her body months in advance, inducing symptoms that would appear credible. She studied medical conditions, learned which complaints would trigger emergency protocols, and timed her actions perfectly. On April 17, 2014, during breakfast, Sophia complained of severe abdominal pain. The medical staff initially dismissed her concerns, but when she collapsed in the recreation yard, clutching her stomach and vomiting, they had no choice but to take her seriously. She was transported to Victor Valley Global Medical Center, the nearest facility equipped for potential emergency surgery. Sophia was escorted by 2 corrections officers and transported in a prison van. Standard protocol required her to be handcuffed during transit, but once at the hospital, restraints could be adjusted based on medical necessity. This was the opportunity Sophia had been waiting for. At the hospital, she was taken to an examination room where doctors ran tests. The symptoms were convincing enough to justify observation, though nothing immediately life-threatening was found. She was moved to a room on the 3rd floor, with 1 officer stationed outside her door and another at the end of the hallway. At 2:43 in the morning, the hospital fire alarm activated. Smoke began pouring from a utility closet on the 2nd floor. The alarm triggered immediate chaos. Hospital staff rushed to evacuate patients from nearby rooms. The corrections officers stationed outside Sophia's room heard the commotion and momentarily stepped away to assess the situation. That was all the time she needed. The handcuffs securing her to the bed rail had already been unlocked hours earlier by a maintenance worker who had been bribed through an intermediary. Sophia slipped out of bed. She changed into civilian clothes that a complicit nurse had left in the bathroom and walked calmly toward the stairwell. The fire was small and controlled, deliberately set to create confusion without causing real harm. By the time it was extinguished and staff realized what had happened, Sophia was gone. She exited through a service entrance where a dark blue sedan waited. Behind the wheel was someone she had never met in person, but had communicated with extensively, a driver hired through encrypted channels and paid in cryptocurrency. The car pulled away from the hospital at normal speed, attracting no attention. Within minutes, they were on Interstate 15 heading northeast. The alarm was not raised immediately. The corrections officers initially assumed Sophia had been moved during the evacuation. It took nearly 40 minutes to confirm she had disappeared. By then, she had a significant head start. An alert went out to local and state police, but the description they had was already outdated. Sophia had changed her appearance in the car, cutting her long, dark hair short and dyeing it blonde with products that were in the vehicle. She removed the prison-issued clothing and dressed in jeans, a hoodie, and sneakers. She looked nothing like the woman in the official photographs. The escape made national news within hours. Media outlets reported that a woman serving life for drug trafficking had fled from a California hospital. Her photograph, taken at the time of her arrest years earlier, was broadcast repeatedly. Law enforcement across multiple states was alerted. The FBI became involved, treating the escape as a high-priority case. But Sophia had planned everything. She knew the first 72 hours were critical. If she could remain undetected during that time, her chances of evading capture increased exponentially. Sophia was taken to a safe house in rural Nevada, a property owned through shell companies and intermediaries. There she rested, planned her next moves, and gathered the resources she would need: fake identification documents, cash, a vehicle registered under a false name, and most importantly, detailed information about Daniel Crawford. His address, his daily schedule, his home security system, everything had been compiled. Sophia spent 3 days at the safe house watching news coverage of her escape, taking note of search efforts, and waiting for the initial frenzy to subside. Federal authorities had informed Daniel Crawford of the escape. They warned him that given his history with Sophia, he could be a potential target. They offered protective measures, but Daniel declined. He did not believe she would come for him after all these years. He thought the past was buried, that she had probably moved on, focused on surviving rather than seeking revenge. He reassured his wife Angela that everything would be fine, that law enforcement would recapture Sophia quickly. He was convinced the woman he had known in the past was no longer a threat to him. That assumption would prove to be his fatal mistake. On April 23rd, 6 days after her escape, Sofia Delgado crossed into Arizona. She drove a silver Honda Civic registered under the name Patricia Ruiz, an identity she had purchased years earlier through her criminal network. The documents were flawless, complete with driver's license, social security card, and credit history. To any police officer who might pull her over during a routine traffic stop, she would appear to be exactly who the documents claimed. She maintained moderate speed, followed all traffic laws, and avoided drawing attention. The last thing she needed was a chance encounter with law enforcement that would unravel everything she had planned. Scottsdale was a city Sofia had never visited, but she had studied it thoroughly through online research. Located in the Sonoran Desert northeast of Phoenix, it was known for its golf courses, luxury resorts, and affluent neighborhoods. It was the type of place people came to reinvent themselves, to escape their past and start fresh. Daniel Crawford had chosen it for precisely those reasons. After the scandal of his relationship with Sofia and the subsequent trial, he needed a place far from California where he could disappear and live a normal life. Scottsdale had provided that refuge, or so he believed. Sofia checked into a budget motel on the outskirts of the city, paying cash for a week in advance. The desk clerk barely glanced at her identification, more interested in his phone than the guests coming and going. Her room was on the ground floor, easily accessible should she need to leave quickly. She kept the curtains drawn, the door chain locked, and her belongings packed in a way that allowed for rapid exit. Paranoia had kept her alive this far. She would not abandon it now. The first 2 days were devoted to surveillance. She located Daniel's home, a modest 2-story house in a quiet residential neighborhood about 20 minutes from downtown. The property had a small front yard, a detached garage, and a wooden fence separating it from neighbors. Security cameras were installed at the front door and above the garage. Sofia noted their locations, angles, and system type. It was a basic setup, likely connected to a monitoring service, but not sophisticated enough to stop someone with her determination. Daniel's daily routine was predictable. He left home each morning at 7, drove to his consulting firm's office in a light blue pickup truck, and spent most of the day managing projects and meeting with clients. His wife Angela worked part-time as a dental hygienist, usually leaving around 9 and returning in the early afternoon. Her 2 daughters from a previous marriage attended the local high school. The family seemed ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of suburban existence millions of Americans lived without incident. But Sofia saw the cracks beneath the surface, the vulnerabilities that could be exploited. She followed Daniel on his daily routes, always maintaining distance, never getting close enough for him to notice her. She watched him stop at a coffee shop each morning, ordering the same drink, a large black coffee with 2 sugars. She observed how he had lunch at a Mexican restaurant on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always sitting at the same table near the window. She noted he went to the gym 3 evenings a week, spending approximately an hour on weights and cardio. These patterns revealed a man who had settled into comfortable predictability, someone who no longer looked over his shoulder, who believed the dangers of his past had faded into distant memory. But Sofia also noticed something else. Daniel appeared perpetually tense. Even from a distance, she could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way he gripped the steering wheel too tightly, in the forced nature of his smiles when interacting with others. He was a man carrying weight, perhaps guilt, or a fear that never fully disappeared. News of her escape had clearly affected him despite his external dismissals. She had seen news clips where Angela Crawford spoke briefly to reporters, assuring them her husband was cooperating with authorities, and they felt safe. But the increased frequency with which Daniel checked his phone, the way he scanned parking lots before exiting his truck, told a different story. On the 3rd day of surveillance, Sofia made her first direct move. She needed to get closer, to understand his security measures more intimately. She waited until the family left, then approached the house on foot dressed in athletic wear, appearing to be just another jogger in the neighborhood. She jogged past the property twice, observing the alarm company sticker on the front window, the position of motion sensor lights, and the fact that the backyard fence had a gate secured with a simple latch. The house was protected, but not impenetrably so. Sophia also began making phone calls. Using a burner phone purchased with cash, she called Daniel's office, disguising her voice and claiming to be a potential client interested in security consultation. The receptionist connected her to Daniel, and for the first time in 8 years, Sophia heard his voice. It was older, more tired, but unmistakably his. She asked generic questions about services and pricing, keeping the conversation brief and professional. Daniel had no idea who he was speaking with. When she hung up, Sophia felt a surge of satisfaction. She was close now, so close she could almost taste the revenge she had been planning for years. Federal authorities were still actively searching for her, but they focused primarily on the Southwest, particularly Nevada and California, where several witnesses had reported possible sightings. They had warned Daniel to remain vigilant, and FBI agents had questioned him about potential threats. Daniel had cooperated fully, providing details about his history with Sophia, and acknowledging she might hold a grudge against him. But he had also expressed confidence that she would be captured quickly, that someone with her profile could not remain hidden for long. The agents were not as certain. They knew Sophia was intelligent, resourceful, and highly motivated. Women like her did not make careless mistakes. On April 29th, 12 days after the escape, Sophia decided it was time to make contact. She had gathered enough information, studied his routines thoroughly, and prepared her strategy. That evening, as Daniel left the gym and walked toward his truck in the parking lot, he received a text message from an unknown number on his phone. It contained only 4 words: "I have not forgotten." Daniel stopped dead in his tracks, his hand frozen on the truck's door handle. He stared at the screen, his face draining of color. He frantically looked around, searching for any sign of who might be watching. But there were only other gym-goers heading to their vehicles, oblivious to his panic. He immediately called the FBI agent assigned to his case and reported the message. The agent instructed him to preserve the phone and bring it to the office the next morning so they could attempt to trace the number. Daniel drove home well above the speed limit, constantly checking his rear-view mirrors. When he arrived, he did not park in the garage as usual, but left the truck in the driveway, closer to the street where he felt more exposed but also more visible to neighbors. He rushed inside and immediately went to check on Angela and the girls. They were fine, watching television in the living room, unaware of the message that had just shattered his fragile sense of security. That night, Daniel barely slept. He stayed awake, alert to every sound, his mind racing, imagining possible scenarios. He had known this might happen. He had feared it from the moment he learned of her escape, but receiving confirmation that she was out there watching him transformed abstract fear into concrete terror. Angela asked him repeatedly what was wrong, why he seemed so agitated. He told her it was work stress, not wanting to frighten her with the truth. But she was not fooled. She had seen the news, heard the warnings, and noticed her husband's behavior since Sophia's escape. Sophia watched from her car parked 2 blocks away. She had seen Daniel's panicked reaction, his frantic search in the parking lot, his reckless driving back home. She had achieved her first objective: frighten him, destroy his peace, remind him that the past never truly dies. But fear was only the beginning. What would come next required precision, timing, and the willingness to cross a line from which there would be no return. She had crossed many lines in her life. She had committed acts she could never undo. One more would not change who she had become. The FBI's response to the text message was immediate but ultimately frustrating. Agents traced the burner phone to a prepaid device purchased with cash at a convenience store in Tempe, nearly 30 minutes from Scottsdale. Surveillance camera footage from the store showed a woman matching Sophia's general description, but her face was hidden by sunglasses and a baseball cap. The phone had been turned off immediately after sending the message, making real-time tracking impossible. It was a dead end, and everyone involved knew it. Special Agent Marcus Webb, the lead investigator on the case, met with Daniel at the Scottsdale office the following morning. Webb was nearly 50, an FBI veteran with extensive experience capturing fugitives. He had dealt with dangerous escapees before, but something about Sophia's case unsettled him. Most fugitives ran. They tried to disappear into Mexico or Central America or hide with family. They did not taunt their victims, did not announce their presence. The text message suggested this was someone who was not just fleeing but hunting. That psychological profile made her far more dangerous and unpredictable. During the meeting, Webb outlined the Bureau's plan. They would increase patrols around Daniel's home and workplace. Plainclothes agents would conduct periodic surveillance. Daniel's phone would be monitored for any additional messages. They recommended he vary his daily routines, avoid predictable patterns, and consider temporarily relocating his family. Daniel listened, nodding mechanically, but Webb could see the fear etched into his features. He was a man who understood he had become prey. Angela Crawford joined the conversation later that day. She sat in the conference room at the FBI office, arms crossed tightly over her chest, listening as Webb explained the threat level. Her reaction was a mixture of anger and disbelief. She knew about Daniel's past, the trial and his relationship with Sophia, but that had been years ago. A chapter she believed was closed. Now it was bursting back into their lives with terrifying immediacy. She demanded to know why they had not yet captured Sophia, why someone so recognizable could remain free. Webb explained the difficulties, the resources being deployed, and the reality that modern fugitives with preparation and funding could evade capture longer than most people believed. The family made the difficult decision to send Angela's daughters to live with their biological father in New Mexico until the situation was resolved. The girls protested, confused about having to leave suddenly, but Angela insisted. She would not risk their safety. They left that evening, driven by a family friend across state lines. The house felt emptier without them, and the silence amplified every creak and groan of the structure. Daniel installed additional locks on the doors and purchased a handgun, something he had sworn never to do after leaving his career in corrections. But desperation erodes principles. Meanwhile, Sophia had moved to another motel, this one slightly closer to downtown Scottsdale. She knew the FBI would be actively searching, analyzing surveillance camera footage, checking hotels and rental properties. Staying in one place too long invited discovery. She rotated between 3 different motels over the course of a week, never staying more than 2 nights anywhere. She paid cash, used different names, and altered her appearance subtly but effectively. Her short blonde hair was now covered by a dark wig. She wore colored contact lenses that changed her eye color from brown to green. Makeup techniques she had learned years earlier allowed her to adjust her facial features enough to confuse facial recognition software. She continued her surveillance but adapted her methods. Rather than following Daniel directly, she positioned herself in places where she knew he would eventually appear. She sat in coffee shops with her laptop open, pretending to work remotely like many other patrons. She browsed grocery stores where his family shopped. She walked through the hardware store he frequented for business supplies. Each time, she observed from a distance, never making direct eye contact, never staying too long. She was a ghost, present but invisible. On May 4th, 15 days after her escape, Sophia sent a second message. This time it arrived via email to Daniel's personal account. The subject line read, "Do you sleep well?" The body of the email contained a photograph Daniel recognized immediately. It had been taken during their marriage and showed the two of them at a restaurant in San Diego. Daniel was smiling, his arm around Sophia's shoulders. She had cropped herself out of the image, leaving only Daniel, but the implication was clear. She had been close enough to access personal photographs, close enough to touch him if she had wanted. Daniel forwarded the email to Agent Webb within minutes. The technical team analyzed the message headers and traced it to a computer at a public library in nearby Mesa. Security footage from the library showed a woman using the terminal at approximately the time the email was sent. But once again, her face was partially obscured. She wore glasses, a scarf, and kept her head down. The librarian working that day could not provide a useful description. The woman was unremarkable, forgettable, exactly what Sophia intended. The psychological toll on Daniel became increasingly evident. He stopped going to the gym out of fear of being alone in parking lots. He worked from home more frequently, holding meetings via video conference. When he did venture out, he was hyper-vigilant, constantly checking mirrors, scanning crowds, startling at any unexpected sound. Angela watched her husband unravel, powerless to stop it. She suggested they leave, go somewhere Sophia could not find them, but Daniel refused. Running felt like admitting defeat, like giving her power over his entire life. He had worked too hard to rebuild, to create something stable. He would not let her take it away. But Sophia was patient. She knew fear was a corrosive force that wore people down over time. She did not need to strike immediately. Each day Daniel spent terrified. Each night he stayed awake listening for any sound that might signal her arrival. Was part of her revenge. She had spent 8 years behind bars, 8 years deprived of freedom and autonomy. Now she was depriving him of peace, of security, of the illusion that he could escape consequences. On the afternoon of May 7th, Daniel returned home after picking up supplies and found something that froze his blood. On his front porch, carefully placed on the doormat, was a small gift-wrapped box. No card, no label, just silver paper and a white ribbon. He immediately called 911, refusing to touch it. Police and FBI agents arrived within 20 minutes. An explosives technician examined the package with portable X-ray equipment before carefully opening it. Inside was a single object, a wedding ring, the one Daniel had given Sophia during their brief marriage. The message was unmistakable. She had not only been watching, she had been on his property, had stood at his door and left a memento of their past as a promise of what was coming. Agent Webb authorized 24-hour protection. 2 agents would rotate in 12-hour shifts, stationed in an unmarked vehicle parked in front of the house. The arrangement was expensive and resource-intensive, but given the circumstances, the Bureau deemed it necessary. Webb made clear to his team that Sofia Delgado should not be underestimated. She had evaded capture for 3 weeks, demonstrated sophisticated operational security, and shown her willingness to engage in psychological warfare. She was dangerous, motivated, and growing increasingly bold. For the first 48 hours, the security presence seemed to work. There were no additional messages, no suspicious activity, no signs of Sophia. Daniel began to feel slightly more secure, though he still barely slept. Angela remained on edge, startling at every unexpected noise. The house felt like a prison, windows covered with curtains, doors locked and chained. They ordered food delivery rather than risk going out. Their lives had been reduced to waiting, existing in a state of suspended animation until Sophia was captured, or something terrible happened. Sophia, for her part, had pulled back. She understood the increased security made direct action difficult, but not impossible. She spent days observing the FBI protection operation, noting shift changes, identifying patterns in agent behavior. She noticed the agents rotated their positions every few hours, walked the perimeter, checked sight lines. They were professionals, alert, but they were also human. Humans made mistakes, grew tired, became complacent over time when nothing happened. On May 10th, 23 days after her escape, Sophia identified her opportunity. She had been following local news about forecasted severe storms in the region. Meteorologists predicted heavy rain, possible flooding, and power outages. Weather created chaos, and chaos created opportunities. That evening, as dark clouds gathered over the desert and the first drops of rain began to fall, Sophia prepared for her final move. She dressed in dark clothing, athletic pants, and a waterproof jacket. She wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints and carried a small backpack with the tools she would need. Inside was a gun, a 9mm she had acquired through her contacts in Los Angeles, untraceable and loaded with a full magazine. Sophia had killed before, though never with her own hands. This would be different, personal, the kind of act that could never be undone. The storm intensified as night fell. Wind howled through cacti, rain hammered windows, and lightning illuminated the sky with brilliant flashes. Electricity flickered throughout the neighborhood before cutting out completely around 10 o'clock. The FBI command post's backup generators kicked in, but agents on the ground operated with flashlights and vehicle headlights. Visibility was reduced to almost zero. It was exactly what Sophia had been waiting for. She approached the Crawford residence from the desert terrain behind the property, moving slowly and deliberately. Rain masked any sound she made. The FBI agents were focused on the front of the house, their vehicle positioned to monitor the street and driveway. They had no reason to expect approach from the rear. Sophia reached the back fence and scaled it easily, practiced movements executed flawlessly. She dropped into the yard, crouching low, letting her eyes adjust to darkness. The motion sensor lights that would normally have activated remained dark due to the power outage. Sophia moved toward the back door and tried the handle. Locked, as expected. She pulled out a lockpick set from her backpack and worked quickly, fingers moving with muscle memory developed years earlier. The lock gave way after 90 seconds. She opened the door carefully and slipped inside. The house was silent except for the storm raging outside. Sophia stood in the kitchen, water dripping from her clothes onto the tile floor. She removed her wet jacket and pulled out the gun. Her heart rate remained steady, breathing controlled. This was the moment she had been planning for months, the culmination of everything she had sacrificed. She moved through the ground floor, checking rooms, confirming the layout matched what she had studied in property records. She found Daniel and Angela in the master bedroom on the second floor. They were awake, talking in low voices, their faces illuminated by the glow of a battery-powered lantern. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed despite the late hour. Angela stood by the window, peering through a gap in the curtains at the FBI vehicle outside. Neither heard Sophia approach until she stepped through the doorway, gun raised and pointed directly at Daniel. Angela screamed, a sound swallowed by thunder. Daniel froze, eyes wide, recognizing the woman before him. Despite her changed appearance, he knew her immediately. Years dissolved, and he was transported back to the trial, the moment she had stared at him from the defense table as he testified against her. That look of cold fury had never left him, haunting his dreams. Now it was here, real and immediate. Sophia spoke, her voice calm and measured despite the weapon in her hands. She told Daniel he had taken her life, that his testimony had sealed her fate. He tried to respond, tried to explain he had only told the truth, that she had manipulated him. But Sophia wanted no explanations, no justifications. She had come for one thing, and she intended to take it. Angela begged, pleaded for their lives, promised they would disappear, never speak of this. But Sophia's determination was absolute. The first shot rang out at 10:47, barely audible over the storm. It struck Daniel in the chest, throwing him backward onto the bed. Angela's screams pierced the night as Sophia fired again, ensuring Daniel would not survive. The FBI agents outside heard nothing at first, the storm masking the gunshots. Only when Angela ran to the window, pounding glass and screaming for help, did they realize something was wrong. By the time agents burst through the front door and rushed upstairs, Sophia was gone. She had exited the way she entered, disappearing into the storm-soaked desert behind the property. Daniel Crawford lay dead, 2 bullets in his chest, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Angela was hysterical, in shock. Agents immediately called for backup and medical assistance, but it was already too late. Sophia had accomplished what she came to do. The manhunt that followed was the largest federal operation in Arizona in over a decade. Within hours, roadblocks were established on all major highways within a 100-mile radius. Local, state, and federal agents flooded the region. Helicopters equipped with thermal cameras searched the mountainous terrain despite the storm. Every motel, gas station, and rest area received alerts with Sophia's photograph and description. The window for escape was closing rapidly. Sophia was captured on May 13th, 26 days after her escape. A state trooper conducting a routine traffic stop on Interstate 17 pulled over a vehicle for a broken taillight. The driver presented identification that appeared legitimate, but something about her demeanor raised suspicion. The officer ran the information through his system and received an immediate alert. He had just stopped Sofia Delgado. She was arrested without resistance. In the vehicle, authorities found maps, more fake IDs, and approximately $30,000 in cash. Sofia said nothing during her arrest, immediately invoking her right to remain silent. The trial for Daniel Crawford's murder took place 8 months later in federal court in Phoenix. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: forensic analysis, Jennifer's testimony, surveillance footage, and the murder weapon found in Sofia's possession. The defense attempted to argue temporary insanity, claiming years of incarceration had damaged her mental state. But the prosecution countered with evidence of meticulous planning, demonstrating clear premeditation and rational thinking. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. The judge sentenced Sofia to death, a sentence that would likely be appealed for years, but sent a clear message about the severity of her crimes. During sentencing, the judge noted Sofia had shown no remorse. She had systematically planned and executed a revenge murder and represented a continued threat to society. She was returned to federal custody, this time under maximum security conditions with no possibility of escape. Sofia Delgado remains on death row as her appeals slowly progress through the system. She has granted only one interview to a journalist writing a book about her case. In it, she expressed no regret for killing Daniel Crawford, stating he had destroyed her life and deserved what happened. When asked if revenge had been worth sacrificing what remained of her freedom, she simply said some debts can only be paid in blood. It was a chilling statement from a woman who had proven capable of extraordinary violence in pursuit of vengeance.